Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Educator Livestream. My name is Louis Catali, and I am your host. And we've got Tom Shannon, who is our co-host this week, but next week he will be the host again. And I'm hosting this week because we've got a special panel today assembled of Epic Games elite and veteran UI UX team. And we're really excited about this week's stream because if you recall, a couple weeks ago, we had our UX research team that joined us, and this is our second in kind of a series of streams that we have done with, kind of a special team at Epic, or series of teams. We had a great stream a couple weeks ago with the guys who, and it was also a very spirited stream with the UX research team. And for those of you who joined us for that stream, it was kind of interesting, if you recall, Tom, because we were like, hopefully the members participating in the stream will be very active, and you guys were very active in the stream, really participated very actively in the discussion about UX research. But it was always our goal to also bring in the UI UX team. And so we've had some folks at Epic who really helped us assemble this amazing group of really senior veteran developers, programmers, artists, designers to come and join us on this stream. So it is our pleasure to welcome Louise Rausmussen. Probably said that wrong. Matt Shetler, Bill Harris, and Marcel Swanepoel to the stream today. And this is a panel of artists, designers, and programmers who are here today to share really a lot of what they do and what they've done. And we've got some, real veterans who are joining us today to talk about the other side of UI, UX at Epic. And I think many of the team here has been at Epic for quite some time. And in many ways is really a group of people that have been working on, one of the largest games, but also one of the most used engines, I think, on the planet, right? Like Unreal Engine is a very prolific tool set that lots and lots of people use, that has to be used. And this team working with the other team also is trying to really make sure that from a usability perspective, from access to the tool set is getting the right stuff in front of the people. So as usual, we've got Tom Shannon here, who is joining us to help co-host today's stream. But let me take a few minutes to introduce everyone to the stream. So Phil popped out for a second. Hopefully he'll be right back. Let's introduce a couple of the folks who are joining us. How about Matt? Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your time at Epic, and
Sure.
let everyone know who you are and where you've come from, and kind of stuff you've worked on and what specifically you do. And a little later on the stream, they'll all talk more in depth about what specifically they do. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Matt Shetler. I've been at Epic for a little over 5 years now. I started actually with the UX research team. I was brought on to help out with the research that they were doing on Fortnite at the time, and also other games like Paragon and some of the other projects that Epic does. Um, for that team, my first day actually was watching a Fortnite test, and taking notes and writing up a report afterwards. And often what I would do with that is help when say that there was an issue that we observed that testers, it wasn't working in the way that the game designers intended. We would write notes and suggestions, and sometimes I would do like mock-ups or little wireframes or something to be like a suggestion, like maybe try this. And we did that for a while. And at one point, the UI director on Paragon said, "Hey, why don't you come tell us how to do it right the first time, so we don't have to keep going through this cycle?" Um, I don't know if I was quite that successful, but I did join the team and worked on Paragon for probably about a year and a half, maybe up to 2 years, which was a fantastic and project to work on. But with Fortnite's meteorite, fantastic success and rise to
You
popularity,
could say
um,
meteoric. It was pretty
I,
meteoric.
I think I could if I could pronounce the word correctly. I think that was my challenge there. Um, and resources were just put onto to Fortnite at that point. So I've been part of the Fortnite UI team for the last 3 years. It's a fantastic team, and we're constantly like working on new, exciting. There's always something cool and challenging and ambitious to work on all parts of Fortnite. So it's been a real pleasure over the years. Starting out just helping out in little ways, but now helping out quite significantly on big features that we work on. So yeah,
So your official title is you're the lead UX designer, right? So what specifically does that mean? So you're a designer, versus
yeah,
an artist versus but you're a UX designer versus a UI designer. Part of,
right.
as you know, part of the stream really focuses on working with the learning community, the education community. So, is there a distinction between a UI designer versus a UX designer? Like, how do we define those a little? And maybe you're going to talk about this a little bit more in your presentation, but just, give us a little bit of a heads up as to how that distinction might be found.
Sure. Sometimes um, even within the game industry, but even wider, some of these terms get used differently. But at Epic, um, a UX designer is, uh, at least as part of the UI team, is very much tied to a process that begins with ideation
Hmm.
of a feature, and we do things like some research and discovery and exploration to try to say, like, okay, can we take this idea that might exist in people's head in different forms and start to put it into something tangible that we can really kind of get on the same page on. We try to manage the space between potentially like goals of the game designer versus what we believe players want, and many times that's the same thing, and sometimes there's a little deviation there. And we try to manage that space to come up with a solution in UI that will kind of solve all the problems. That will often start with that kind of ideation, and we start putting like visuals together. Sometimes it's paper and pencil, sketches that we can do really quickly. But often it goes into grayscale wireframe images that represent different screens of the game. So it might be
Flows.
a flow, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
build it into flows and how this screen transitions to that screen, and how you might drill into something and come back, and what the information on the different screens are, and whether you should have a drill in or should it all be at a
Right.
top level. And so there's a lot of just design decisions that we make in that
So
space.
you want to fail
Um,
there, right? You want to fail
oh yeah,
before
we
you do
like
it.
that's cheap to make, and so we
Yeah.
want to do something quick, get feedback on it, iterate, like repeat that process as often as we can. With Fortnite, because we have a very quick cadence of releases, sometimes that process is quite tight, and so we iterate as quickly as we can. We fail as quick as we can, so that we can then find something that works. And then we sort of collaborate with visual designers like Marcel to take those grayscale wireframes and start putting them into a more representative vision of how that will look in the game in terms of actual colors and content and layouts that
Yeah.
they make, and beautiful animations and things like that, to then ideally deliver a polished product to our players.
And before we go and talk to Marcel, I don't know. 10, 12 years ago, I worked on some packaged games, right? So things that had to be finished, put into a disc, and then put on a store shelf. This is a very different beast, right? Working on these live games where you're updating it every week or every couple weeks, every with different frequency. Were you working on packaged games before as well?
Yeah, I've worked on some package games. Honestly, a lot of the stuff that I worked on way back before joining Epic involved like some casual games that were downloaded, but it was there wasn't a physical version until honestly until later that
Yeah.
they kind of made a physical version of it. But yeah, it was a essentially one and done release that didn't have the option to do
Yeah.
weekly updates and things like that.
Because it's a different animal, right? Back in the old days, you had to get it right, and it wasn't until you patched, and did a drop release on a downloadable release that you could actually fix the UI. And I think the stakes were different. Not that they were higher; they just are different now. I think
Yeah,
there's a quicker cadence of updates, so maybe there's a bit more experimentation that you can do, particularly with the user experience of a I don't know what that was. Sorry about that, everyone. But can you experiment more with live games in this way, or does that give you a little bit
yeah.
more
I,
freedom, maybe?
I think so. Like you said, it's different. It's been said that no game is ever done; it just is released.
Right.
And with Fortnite in particular, we have a release, and then we have a release, and then we have a release. So every time that we this happens quite often, that we get to a point where we release something and we do identify either from feedback that we get from players or surveys that the UX research team does or our own desires to improve something that we worked on. There's often we get the chance. Sometimes we are moving on to the next big thing, and it's just like not worth the bangs for the buck isn't there to kind of go back and make those tweaks that you want to make, but you just don't have the time sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's always exciting and interesting. So,
Well, listen, Phil just messaged me and he said his pizza just got there and he's just going to have a couple bites before he joins the stream back. No, that's not true at all. Phil's internet dropped out, so he'll be back in a moment. But let's talk to Marcel real quick because you and Marcel work very closely together. He's the lead visual designer, or one of the lead visual, or I don't know. Marcel, can you clarify for us? Your title's lead visual designer. Are you one of many visual designers, or are you the lead visual designer? Hey, Phil, how was that pizza? We just told everyone you had to drop out because you had a couple bites of pizza coming incoming.
Pizza was great.
Awesome,
Went
awesome,
down fast.
awesome. We were just introducing Marcel to everyone. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Marcel, and what you do, and what your title means, and stuff like that.
Right. Hi. Yeah. So yeah. So to your question, there's two lead visual designers. The other lead visual designer is Reese. He's been the lead UI for a little while longer than myself now. But as our team grows and expands, to kind of to make sure we can get all the work done. We obviously need to get more leads and more management, etc. in there. So that's basically how we came about having two visual leads now. So I've been at Epic for 6 years. I was originally employed to come and help out on Save the World as a UI artist. That was when the term was still a UI artist back then. And so I was on Save the World for a while, and then I also jumped on to Paragon like Matt and went and helped out on Paragon for a little while, which was really awesome. But then with as Matt also said, with the success of Fortnite Battle Royale, we all came back to help with
You
that.
got swiped, didn't you? You guys got
Yeah,
swiped back.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, that's pretty much my story for how I got
So
to Epic. And
Now, so you're a visual designer. Matt is a UX designer, so he makes wireframes and he makes user experience flows, and then you take those and you make the visual art for them after they've been proven in many ways, and you actually will implement those and make the rough art, get it approved through art direction, whatever the case is, and get them in game and make it right. Is that roughly the right description?
Yeah, I would say that that's pretty accurate. What we like to do is, as visual designers, we like to get in, collaborate with UX a little bit earlier on before we just jump into actually doing visuals. Just because, as visual designers, but we can add a little bit more of a sort of visual conceptual space we can bring to the process. So we tend to jump in early on, and kind of help out where we can on the UX, and just input where we can. After that, once everybody's happy with the UX, then we start doing some visual markups. Obviously, keeping in mind trying to keep it to the style that's already been the style guides that have already been set out for the game. And then, obviously at that point, we work very closely with engineering as well when it comes to implementation. So we do very much span quite a range when it comes to the conceptual side, and then obviously implementation and getting assets in game and animation, and obviously optimization of the assets.
Right. So am I hearing that you do bring it into Unreal and you use? So what's the primary tool that you guys are using in Unreal? Is it Unreal Motion Graphics? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, UMG. That's it.
Or are you bringing things into Unreal Motion Graphics, UMG, and testing things out there, or is there a whole separate group that's implementing the functionality of the UIs that Matt designs and you create, or do you do that?
We do that. Yeah, we do that with engineering. So engineering would work on the systems that go along with that, and help us ensure that widget classes and so forth are set up correctly. And we would pretty much come in. We would work in UMG, work on the visual hierarchy, or the hierarchy of the actual widget, build materials, import textures. In Fortnite, we tend to lean a little bit more towards UI space materials, just because it scales very nicely with the multiple platforms that we go to, as opposed
Right.
to having a texture that has to scale over all these resolutions. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a couple more folks to meet as well. So, I think the amazing thing about this team that we have assembled here, they don't only work on Paragon and Fortnite, but of course, we've got an Unreal Engine that also has a UX and a UI, and we also have the store, and we've got a variety of other products and tools and systems that Unreal Engine, Epic Games works around. So I'm going to let Phil digest his pizza just for another minute, and let's go talk to Louise and see what she works on.
Hi. So yeah, I actually exclusively work on the engine, on Unreal Engine. I've been at Epic for just shy of 3 years now. And it's fun for me to hear about the process on the game side also, because while we talk periodically, it's not very often, and the process is actually really similar. There's for anybody who's actually used Unreal Engine, there might be a few of you out there. You may have noticed that there hasn't traditionally been a lot of attention paid to the user experience of it, and so I was brought on to help turn the turn the ship, as it were, in the direction to make the engine, a fun experience also, and something really ultimately that is a more powerful tool because more users can use it. On the other side of that, we're also it's also the responsibility of our team to include the developers in our user base. So our personas include the developers, and we are making infrastructure, developing our visual design language and developing workflows so that the developers don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, as it were. Unreal really it's such an incredible, powerful tool, and it's really grown organically since its inception, and it's really grown at the hands of some brilliant developers who just thought, oh, I really want to get this amazing tool. I saw this research paper, or I want to do this for this particular game. And they sort of get it in however they can so that they can get the game out the door. We're trying to make that process easier for them, and also easier for the people who ultimately want to reuse that tool, so that it's both easier for them to learn, and so that every single new tool that comes on board, it's not this huge learning curve. So I hope that kind of gives you a little taste of the goals of our team. And our team is still pretty small. We're growing really quickly. And our team runs the gamut of what we call, UI UX designers. We have visual designers on our team. Usually everybody does at least sort of 2 UX roles. Like, we have visual designers who also do user experience design, and then we have people more like me who do some user experience design. I'll come up with wireframes or use our design language to come up with new interfaces. But I also am an engineer, and so I'll help build the infrastructure and code to support whatever cool designs our team comes up with.
That sounds like an interesting, tough job too. What's your background? How do you join Epic and get such a cool job? Because
yeah,
that's a big one. That's like, oh, come fix this big. That's like I sometimes use the analogy, or if it's an analogy, I don't know, maybe it's something else. That Epic is this kind of a race car, right? And so but kind of your job is to take this race car and make it easier to drive in some ways. So how do you do that? What background, how do you show up for that job interview and say, I can make your race car easier to drive?
Yeah. Some of it's luck. These days, I think this was touched on recently too. These days you can go to school for user experience design, and there are really amazing programs out there that can teach you design process, design learning, and just you can sort of dive in from there. And generally that's a good starting point. When I was in school, that was certainly not an option. It's, at least I didn't know of it as an option. It was sort of this niche thing that was happening at one, maybe 2 schools. So my history, actually, I went to school for actually astrophysics and computer science. And I was
underachiever. I see you're an underachiever.
I was working with a really brilliant and kind professor who was working on these models in Excel spreadsheets, and he developed these incredibly complex models in Excel, which power to Excel. But I was helping him sort of create more visual and more accurate models, computer models. So that's what I was doing in school. When I came out of school, I ended up at Lucasfilm, and they also have a big in-house DCC tool. And there is where I think my foray into user experience really started. There were several key projects that I had the privilege to work on, where we got to upfront spend a lot of time figuring out, how, what the artists really needed and how to get that to them. And through a lot of mentors, I would say, and a lot of reading, I, gradually learned more and more about user experience design and the design process. And so I was at Lucasfilm for about 8 years, and then I went to Autodesk. And Autodesk is a big, well, I was at a small company that was bought by Autodesk. I think that's generally how people get to Autodesk. And Autodesk is a huge design company. And so I learned a lot there also before coming here. And I was hungry. Looking at Unreal Engine, I think everybody knows how incredibly powerful and what amazing tools there are. And also there are the 5 things that you just wish that you could fix. And so I think it's a really fun, challenging project to work here. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Thank you. And Phil, you also work on some amazing tools and interfaces, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and you do.
Yeah, so I've been at Epic for the last almost 6 years now. And prior to that, I was at a bunch of other companies like MSNBC, AOL, ADP, primarily working on platform specific products. And at Epic, I work on the platform team. We generally work on products that cross multiple teams and multiple product lines. So I've worked with pretty much everyone on this call on some form at some point. And I've worked on a lot of the Epic Game Store, also Unreal Engine creative tools in the launcher, purchase flows, and then a lot of team online web specific work revolving around Fortnite and identity, as well as authentication into any of the games, as well as any of the platform specific tools or products. How I got to Epic, I guess I'll start at what I studied in school. Primarily, I started as a fine artist, painting, drawing, sculpture, a lot of that stuff. Primarily started with like just drawing comic book characters when I was a kid, and then went into fine arts. And a lot of that was primarily about expression and expressing myself visually. I later did an internship with a local newspaper where I learned a bit more about graphic design. I subsequently started majoring in graphic design and learned a little bit more about narrative and creating compelling stories. And I think my primary goal was really to get into the music industry and design for musicians. So that's what I did. I called up Def Jam Records, which was a hip hop record label, and said, "Hey, I want to come down and do an internship." And they were like, "Okay, come down and show us your stuff." So I, drove down to Manhattan and went into their office and showed them my my digital media portfolio. At that time, it was digital media. It was like CD-ROMs and web design, stuff like that. And
remember those days?
Multimedia.
Exactly. There were a lot of these like CD-ROMs with like the Wu-Tang Clan did this like enhanced CD, and you could listen to the music on the CD and then pop it into your computer and see this virtual reality thing.
Macromedia.
Exactly. So
oh man.
So those are the things that kind of inspired me and really kind of drove me to kind of want to create these things. So there was a new record label, which was Rockefeller Records, and Jay-Z, who's like a big artist now, but at the time he was not that big. I pitched the idea of doing this enhanced CD for him, and he said, "Come on, let's do it." And so I interned with them and kind of, created a website for them and did a whole enhanced CD, which got me a lot of, I guess, visibility in the hip hop world. And it was really about, creating these narratives for these hip hop artists. And so subsequently I graduated from school and started working at the a record label Def Jam wanted to do a website, and it was called 360 Hip Hop, and I wound up designing that and still doing like a lot of side work on a lot of different artists' websites. And so my career just kind of evolved, and I wanted to do more. And so I stepped out of music and went into more like television. So I worked at BT and then NBC, working on web series and online kind of components, online experiences for those web series. And that kind of led me to Epic Games.
Wow. I'm still kind of stuck in the fact that you know Jay-Z. But you know, I think one of the things that you're working on a lot of, you know, Epic's grown a lot, right? And so there's a lot more people logging into the Epic ecosystems, and I think we've discovered, and you're probably the work you've done has evolved a lot, but I'm kind of curious about when we learned that we needed to get more fluid as to how we bring people in, right? Because I know that we've that had to evolve, and that's part of the platform team, right? When people want to get access to the store, or they want to get access to whatever, right? You know, that's had to have really required a lot of UI, UX of as to how people get into, you know, Fortnite, get into the stores, get into, you know, all the different things. Is something that we've had to learn to study, learn to let people come through and enjoy that experience just as much as they enjoy playing the games. And that's a really an important part of what you all do. And there's teams of people that make sure that that experience is as fun and as enjoyable and as easy and fluid as everything else. And that's what, you know, I guess the unsung heroes of UI UX are responsible for, right? And it's not always the most, I don't know, like, you know, you always hear about character artists, and not to take anything away from animators and character artists, but like there's this whole team of people that make these paths really fluid and fun, right? And it's a pathway to fun, but it is fun, right? And it can be fun, and it should be fun. And Fortnite, I think, has done a really good job because, you know, all the way through to the load screens and whatever, and the same thing with all the other experiences, I think are really well studied across the board and then implemented. And that's the kind of stuff that you're working on in part as well.
That's correct. That is correct. It was a challenging project, specifically because, you know, Fortnite is one of the first, if not the first, game to allow for crossplay. So taking into account, you know, all of these different platforms that we had to account for. Additionally, we had to account for, you know, age gating, and we also had to account for other platforms that are what we call trusted authenticators, like Google, PlayStation, Xbox.
A lot.
Taking into account all of these different, you know, systems that have their own rules, and then being able to accommodate those rules and work around those rules and fit them into our own system. Completely challenging. We were kind of breaking barriers and you know, making new strides in a direction that hadn't previously been explored before.
I can only imagine, because if anyone's ever gone through console certification before, you know, it's not the most fun process, and they can be a little picky. I can, and when I've gone through it, it's always been one platform at a time. Like, we're doing the Xbox, we're doing the PlayStation, and we kind of, you know, could do some if statements. If running on PlayStation, put some things here and deal with this login flow. And it's amazing. Like, they have expectations, not just of how it looks or where it is, but what happens when someone unplugs a controller, and what happens if their friend messages them. And, you know, it was an enormous amount of work to do each platform. So I can't even wrap my head around
what you guys
trying to take all these platforms all at once and have people kind of, and, you know, when I play Fortnite, for me, it's, I just turn it on and Fortnite happens. You know, all of that complication is completely taken away, and it doesn't matter if I'm on my phone or my, you know, if I'm on the Switch or I go over to the PlayStation, I'm just playing with like different graphics settings as far as I can tell. So that is that has to be incredibly challenging to keep all of that working in this one game. And I had never really thought about, oh yeah, with crossplay, now you've got to make sure it happens.
Right,
It's
right.
one experience for everybody through all of these very different pathways.
Well,
Right, and it was a goal for us to kind of create the same experience, not only on consoles, but on desktop, on the launcher, in all of these different places, just this a consistent experience across the board.
I think you probably become very aware of bad UX UI when you open up an app, and it became really, I think, highlighted and accentuated with mobile devices, right? When you're like, oh, this looks really cool. The advertising's fantastic. I'm going to download this app. And then you're like, I can't use this for 5 seconds. This is the biggest piece of garbage I've ever tried, because the UX UI of it is completely unusable, right? You're like, I'm not even going to leave this on my phone for another 5 minutes because I can't figure it out. I can't do a thing with it. And that's I think a really valuable part of a good UX UI team, is that they figure out the flow of it, and then it works, and it works as expected. I am always surprised. I've got small children, and they couldn't put toothpaste on a toothbrush, but they could work my certain apps on an iPhone, right? And I was like, well, that's good UX UI. Clearly, the UX UI on a toothpaste and toothbrush is broken, but certain apps worked really well.
Hey, right.
And
like putting toothbrush on, it doesn't happen overnight.
And
a lot of variables there.
a lot of variables there.
Speaking of that, though, what another thing that I think is really interesting is that I think Louise, you're going to talk a little bit later about Niagara. Is that right? Because I think your team touched on that, and that's another one that's evolved. And some of the new tools coming into Unreal Engine, Chaos, Niagara, Sequencer. There's some really complicated systems that are coming into Unreal Engine that has been thrown your team's way, which, Niagara, for those of us who have experimented with it, is a lot there. That, it's the entire kitchen with the sink and the plumbing and, and the whole water main system. So they've said, please make this work. Thank you. Right. And,
so Niagara and Blueprints, there's something actually we're really actively working on now. But Chaos that you mentioned, that I am going to show some early things from that early on. And I think that's part of it's a really fun time to be working on the engine, because like we have all these amazing teams and all this really cool tech that is coming in. And these guys who and girls who are coming in to work on these projects are really like the best in their fields. And so they come in and there's just this explosion in a particular area of tech. I think we brought water into Fortnite, a little while ago. And, there was this huge amount of thought process and how can we even do this in the engine. And so I think our team is charged with trying to figure out how to make space for all of those tools and make it so that, again, like each user and each developer doesn't have to figure out how to use it and where to put their, how it can fit in. And so our team is taking this global look, and we all come together. Actually, every day we come together and we have a meeting, and we just sort of, have a Figma board, learn Figma if you want to know. Figma's the flavor of the day for UX tools.
Mark Flanagan's in the chat.
Hopefully it'll stick around for more than 2 months. What?
Mark Flanagan's in the chat. Maybe he can find Figma. Hey, Mark. Thanks for helping out, Mark.
So, we all come together every day, and we've got designers who are, focused on Niagara, or focused on Chaos, or focused on there's cool new modeling and geometry tools coming on board. And so we all come together and say, hey, this is what we're thinking for this. And, you see all those things next to each other. So our team brings them together and tries to figure out how to make it so that when you're using one, there's some rules in place so that using the other tools also feel familiar and easy and hopefully fun one day.
Yeah, that's a tough mission, right? To make it all familiar, and so that when you jump into Niagara, you understand a bit of chaos or blueprint or UMG or animation tools.
And the same thing that you were talking about earlier, when you download an app on your iPhone in the first few minutes, I think that's something our teams, had a lot of fun talking about in just the last few months, is how can we make it so that the new person coming in, can just jump in and do something fun and figure out what they want to do really early. And at the same time, how can we get this crazy technical artist to be able to fine tune their field or whatever it is that they want to do to get their dynamics to work or their lighting to work in exactly the way they want to. And that's a challenge that I think the games guys can speak to too. How do you get the newbie gamer, or the gamer that you want to sort of attract and more and more users, so everybody is having fun on the same platform? How do you get those new people in and have them have fun, and also have the life the very serious esports gamer still be challenged and have fun and have those glorious moments? So the process is really similar.
Well, from an education perspective and a learning perspective, that's really important. And Lewis and I have spent a lot of time teaching Unreal Engine to people, and one of the biggest challenges currently is that it does feel very much like that, where I have to teach a kind of a tool at a time. I have to teach you Niagara. I have to then teach you blueprints, and then I have to teach you materials, and they're all, there's some similarity between them, but yeah, it would be so helpful if there was this commonality, and you would just, and you see it growing organically, like you said, Lewis. Over time we've done that, and it seems it's a very similar sort of challenge to yours, Phil, where it's taking seemingly disparate kind of experiences and finding a way to make them one, and finding that commonality so that people coming in just have a nice experience. But then, like you said, Louise, often the more you dumb it down or the more easy you make it, you can alienate those power players who need every little option, and they want to dig in and they want to change everything. It's such a huge, that's, from both the game side, that's got to be everything from like on-screen stuff to the menu system to, there's always that balance between serving those two personas. How do you balance that? What's the trick? Is there just one?
No, there's a lot of tricks. Okay. I gotta think about this for a minute. Does anybody else have something they want to jump in with? I think.
Yeah, to give you to take some time from you, so you can think a little bit. At least from the in-game in Fortnite, like menus and stuff, like we often are challenged with like all the different types of players that we have on all the different platforms that you can interact with it. So like even when you're looking at any individual screen, we have to think about, can this be used with a mouse? Can this be a controller? Can this be used with touch? And are there differences that we have to take from time to time and things like that? And in terms of like trying to find that balance between different player needs and different goals that we might have, sometimes a strategy that I at least take time to time is sometimes we do a refresh on a certain screen and really try to identify what's the core part of this that's important, and how can we make it as simple, as few different button bindings as we need to have, or The layout is a little bit more clear about what the function is of the screen and how things progress, and try to make it simple, because next season we got to add this, and next season we got to add this, and next season we got to add this, and it kind of gets to a stage where it gets like it will get bloated again, and sometimes we think, okay, we'll got to kind of refresh this again and rethink some of the things we have. Very often, we add things, and because we're focused on it and we're excited about it, and we think that this is really cool, and we got to make sure players are aware of it. But then we end up having fighting on the screen of like, hey, look at me, and hey, look at me, and no, but I'm important. And sometimes we got to step that back over time to really kind of find that balance between what players really want to get out of any different step throughout the game.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote down very similar things to what you were saying. I think when I was thinking about this, the first thing we do is really do some research to figure out what people really want. And often what they say they want is not what they really want. And so when you spend, the time with somebody, or we have partnered with Ben's team also to figure out what are the features that they really want. And the super advanced artist is saying, this, but really it turns out that they only want that button 1% of the time. And so we're going to make that accessible to them. We're going to put it in a consistent place so that they know where it is. And then through that research, we can figure out what are the things that people really need, and only present what people really need on the screen at the time. And then all of the rest of the things to put them in consistent places so that people know where to find them. And so, just like Matt was saying, there's sort of this balance of, presenting or making readily available the things that everybody needs all the time, and the things that people only need sometimes, but when they need it, they really do need it. Yeah,
there's an interesting balance between, it seems like, this like data-driven approach and listening to the users, but interestingly enough, like you said, that you can't just rely on that. So it seems like there's, from your backgrounds, there's some of that design instinct that just all of you have developed over years of doing kind of traditional design. It sounds like learning where people's eyes land, and shape and color and composition. Those are sort of the core. And then you're also using, listening to users and watching and seeing how they use it, and combining that with data. And then also just kind of instinct and kind of that, what if we just put the button down here? What if we just make that on by default? Now they never have to touch it. Those are the sorts. It sounds like, it's not just one sort of approach. It's this taking everything, and it's in a lot of ways, it's not just something that can be learned from a book. It's very much, you have to learn over time what works and what doesn't.
And these things change. These things change periodically. People get used to new paradigms that you have to kind of learn and understand. And it's very much understanding what currently exists in the market, because a lot of experiences currently exist, but they're not ideal. And so I think our job primarily is to understand how people are doing these things in other places, and then how could we make that experience better? Because pretty much all of these experiences exist, whether it's in a digital format or it's just in an analog format. Our job is to understand what are the individual distinct steps that people are doing to achieve their goal. And then we want to also understand what are their motivations and what do they want to do. And our job is to kind of take that information, package it up in a nice way, and make it easier for the users to do exactly what they want to do.
I keyed in on something that you said, Louise, too, and both you, Phil, about consistency, which I think is really, I've noticed in Unreal Engine in particular, but I also notice it in most of the Epic products. I think that there's a significant amount of consistency in what we do with the engine, right? So you can look at Unreal Engine 4.22 and look at what is 4.26, and there's a tremendous amount of consistency in most of the tools, even the evolution of things like the material editor or blueprint. Yes, there are things that move around in the user interface. The same thing with the Epic Games launcher, right? So yes, there's evolution, but there's a lot of consistency. And with regard to what our users, our established users, those folks that have been with the ecosystem for a long time, they probably really appreciate the consistency. With the new users, I think that are trying to learn and onboard into the tool set, they probably really appreciate that consistency as well, because it's got to be really difficult coming in trying to learn something as um, wide and deep as Unreal, and then going from one version to the next, even of something like the launcher or the store or whatever the case is, and going, what happened to my button? What happened to my login screen? What happened to my access point? And it all of a sudden being somewhere else and having to start or take a couple steps back. That's a frustrating point. And I know for me personally, that sometimes is a point at which I'm like, I'll be back some other day or later or never, right? And I know that happens to me with lots of tools. It happens with lots of games. There are games where I'll play, this version of it, that version of it. By the time I get to the third, some designers have made choices where I'm like, I'm not playing that game because the choices that were made were so inconsistent that I will not enjoy this game. And I've decided it, whether maybe I will get over it or not. I've decided that the inconsistency is not worth it for me because I like the consistency of these, right? And I'm talking about your Witcher games, your Assassin's Creed games, games that I love, but the inconsistencies of the design choices have turned me against them, right? Because there's enough in the series. And the same thing with tools. The Maxes, the Mayas from one version to the next. Those are tough choices to make as UX, UI designers, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think that, often to the defense of maybe some of those other games, like often, you can be your own worst critic on things, and you can look back on a piece of work that you put together, like say the first release of a series, and think, man, I can really do better. And you might try things that you're trying to be better, and sometimes you
Sure.
have to try to find that balance between consistency and innovation, and it's a tricky situation. And
Sure.
I think that a lot of people, including myself, make missteps from
How
time
do
to
you
time
do
in that
that?
regard.
How do you do that? That's a tough one, right? Because you want to innovate, but you don't want to betray your loyal
Sure.
followers.
Right. And I think for me, it's been a case of A/B testing sometimes. Does this thing work in this new place? Can people accept it? Is there a higher click rate? And then measuring that change, measuring the difference. Is there an improvement on usage? Is there a decline? And that actually will point the way in whether or not you can roll it out more widely and more broadly moving forward.
So that
Yeah,
takes us back to the other team, right? The research group. Or do you all have your own research group within UX UI, or do you rely back on the user research team that we met with 2 weeks ago?
So for some things we leverage the UX team that's internal. For A/B testing and some things like that, we can do ourselves on the platform side.
Interesting.
And to touch sometimes on like the A/B tests, like you can roll something out new to a small group, and maybe initially you see a little bit like, oh, it's down a little bit. But if you keep that test up, you find out like, oh, it's catching up. Like people have to kind of get used to something, a new pattern, and then it actually starts overtaking the original. And it just because as all of us, we love inconsistency, and when something changes, like we've all experienced some change to some social media version that we're like, oh, they ruined it. How can they possibly have done that? And we keep using it, and then maybe some time you look back at an old version, you're like, wow, that looks terrible. But at the time, we loved it. So sometimes that's you got to have a little bit of a vision and a little bit of that gut instinct and experience of what you believe will work, but then you do have to test it and give it some proper time to see what emerges as the right direction for your product.
We haven't actually taken a whole lot of questions from the chat. There was one that just popped in that I thought was really great to ask. And then, it always happens to us in these streams that we're like, we'll do a little introduction, 20 minutes, right? It's been an hour. Okay. So I just want to point that out because this has been a great, great conversation. And I want to get to your presentations because I've seen some of the slides and I think everyone will be very interested. But one question that just popped through, which is, what is the domain of UX designers in gaming? Do UX designers have input in the gameplay, game flows, or is it primarily handled the game menus and interfaces? Handling the game menus and interfaces that came in through Built.
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question. At least on Fortnite, the people with like UX designer in their title are primarily focused on menus and HUD and interactions of that type, not so much the moment-to-moment gameplay or weapon design or something like that. That said, many of the same process and thinking and iteration go on with the people that have the more game designer in their title to do that very same process and do their research and do their testing and iterate and things like that are on a gameplay front. While there's not necessarily people with the UX designer title in their name, there's game designers that do very much that same thing within the interaction space of the game. Yeah.
Wonderful. Hopefully that answered your question in the chat. So how about we jump into some of the stuff that you guys prepared? Because I think it's, in line with many of the things we've already discussed, but it gives us some visual looks at some of the things that will add context and texture to things we've already talked about. Would anyone like to go first?
Okay.
Perfect.
I always just feel compelled to, if nobody says, I just feel like,
Yeah,
hey.
I mean that's how I was feeling. Like, well, okay, well nobody says so.
I'll do it.
So go ahead, Phil.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, let's see. Well, hopefully you guys can see my screen okay.
We got it.
Awesome. All right, so again, Philip Harris, Senior UX Designer at Epic Games. There's my LinkedIn if you want to drop me a line. And I also work on the platform team here at Epic and special projects and primarily consumer experiences. So
and he
I put
knows
together
Jay-Z, by the way. He knows Jay-Z. Just saying.
So generally, I put together this deck just to show some of the work and then some of the artifacts that UX designer might produce for a project. And it might vary depending on the project and depending on the scope and the goals of the project. But at a high level, we produce some of these artifacts. And generally, these personas might be something that might be a little bit more blown out depending on the project. But we might produce something that's sort of like I generally produce a light persona, and really I focus on what are the motivations of the people that I'm building for, and who are they? I might give them a name that really speaks to the context that I'm putting in that particular project. But I'll also give them a general age, a general summary of what they're about, and really focus on their needs and wants. And this helps me as a designer start to empathize with the consumer of the product that I'm building or designing. I might craft a narrative. And so I think all UX designers are storytellers. And in fact, I'll put it more broadly. I think I think people in general are naturally storytellers, and that's how we understand the world as people. As we communicate with one another, we put things in a context so that we can understand them. And so typically I'll put together these narratives that break down incrementally specific sections of a consumer journey. And depending on who I'm building for, I might do something like this where it's a creator's journey and I incrementally actually just literally write out specific parts of that narrative. Sort of like if you were to take a comic book and just extract the images and just make the storyline. What's happening? And then I'll create something like this. It's a core loop user journey or customer journey. And it's, again, incrementally plotting on a map. What's the first thing this person's doing, second thing, third thing, etc. And then trying to figure out what that core loop to get them back into this experience and keep them in this experience for the most part.
Bill, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yeah.
Is there a review with a team or an executive team during this process, or is this mostly for yourself? Or
yeah, generally speaking, each segment of this, I'm doing checks to make sure, is this right? And it's not just with an executive team or management team. It's also with consumers. At each interval, I am kind of checking, is this right? Does this make sense? Is this what you do? Because this is not all just me making up a story. This is just me really kind of plotting out the experience that exists. I'm not making any images yet. I'm not making any assumptions on how it should look. I'm really just plotting out what are the specific details in this arc, this story arc that I'm building. And what is the core loop? What is the sequence of events? And based on that core loop, I might start to define, okay, now, what's the information architecture around this thing? And information architecture is what are the primary screens that I need to allow the consumer to achieve their goal based on that customer journey. And I'll start breaking it down into individual areas. Some of this might not even, end up in the final product, but this is basically an information architecture for the Epic Games Store for the most part. And how does it intersect with other parts of the ecosystem that is Epic Games? And then also I'll now start playing. I'll start playing with formats. What is the composition of this page? What does it need to do? What role does it play in this story? These become my characters to a certain degree, and I start to kind of give them personality based on the role that they need to play within the ecosystem. So storefront, it's to promote, entice, facilitate discovery and findability. Game detail, provide product details and specs. Each piece has a function, and I'm keying in on that function and distilling it ideally to a couple of words and simplifying it for the most part. And then I'll start creating low fidelity wireframes. What's the information hierarchy? How are things going to be placed on the screen, more or less? And I'm just using blocks, not using any images. And it gives me an idea of how to format this page so that it gets those points across to the consumer. And then I might go into more high fidelity wireframes. Now, what's the navigation saying? What are some things that can go in these blocks? How do I now start to give this thing a little bit more life? And you can see incrementally, it starts to feel like a thing, like a real boy. And then you might end up with visual design. And again, based on how I work, I like to incrementally test these things. And at each point, I am presenting it to customers sometimes, and then executive level, just to make sure it's going in the right direction. I also include the development team because they're a really intricate part of what's possible, right? Because my job as a UX designer is to figure out what's usable and useful. And their job is really to help me figure out what's possible. And then I'm also trying to figure out what's desirable. What do consumers want? And then I'm also breaking it down for multiple platforms, because mobile is a really big platform for us as well. I'm really trying to figure out, okay, how does this desktop experience now map to other platforms, console, mobile, iPad? What are the other breakpoints? So each thing has to kind of, I have to have a solution for each of these things. And then prototyping. Once we get into prototyping, I'm designing out an idea, and this might be an assumption, but it's really to kind of, again, optimize and make the product a little better as I go. I'm going to show you guys a little video of what prototyping might be. I'm going to pop out for a second and then share my screen here.
You want me to play it for you?
There we
Kate?
go.
I've got it as well. Bill Harris Concept 07.
I think maybe this will work. Hopefully. Okay.
Roll.
Yeah, if you can play it for me, I think it'll be better.
Here it comes.
I'm having a little bit of trouble.
There it goes. It's playing, so it's scrolling down.
Yep. And so this is really to give us an idea. If there's a concept that hasn't been proven out, this is really to give everyone on the team an idea of what this experience might start to feel like as the user's navigating it, right? And some of these concepts are far out, and some of them are kind of closer to home, just in terms of what might be acceptable. And so, to your point, things to the question you asked earlier about things changing places in interfaces. Some people will hate it, some people will like it. So this is a good choice for us to kind of test and A/B it and say 50% of the audience that comes to the site will experience this product detail page, and another 50% will experience this product detail page, and we'll see which one gets more click-through rates, or which one gets more, which one is more navigable based on usage.
Great, I played it twice through.
Yep. Okay. So I'll jump back in and take it over really quickly. Okay. And then, so hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's optimization. So again, we leverage the internal UX testing team, UX research team, to test our products and our pages and things of that nature with real users, so we can get some of that qualitative feedback. Because what we can glean from A/B testing is more quantitative, right? We can see how many people do this and how many people do that. But for real qualitative feedback, we leverage the UX research team so they can actually ask specific questions to users who are using the product. What do you think about this color? What do you think about the way this is placed, or where this is placed? And that information gives our designers, and myself included, a way of moving forward with the design and optimizing it for usage more broadly. Competitive web is another project I worked on. Again, similar process. Again, information architecture. Who's my primary audience? What do they need? What's the information? How am I going to present that? And how do these pages kind of fit together? It's really like a puzzle. You're rearranging these puzzle pieces to really give your users the best experience possible. And how do they flow together? And then also, wireframing is super important. Before you put in a whole lot of effort into going into full-fledged high-fidelity visual design, breaking that down into really simple kind of block pages and experiences to get your point across.
Can I ask
and then visual design. Yeah.
Technical question? What applications do you use to prototype and to build these out? Is there anything specific, or are you just like hammering it all together in Photoshop like I would?
Yeah, so I put together a slide for you. There you go.
Oh my
Some of the
God.
primary tools. Some of the primary tools that I'm using for the most part is Figma, which is, again, somebody mentioned it on the call. The design world is all abuzz around Figma right now, primarily because it's a great tool to collaborate in. You can basically, it's browser based for the most part, although there is a desktop component. It's browser based. I can send you a link, you can see it, you can comment, and we can kind of collaborate back and forth. You can have multiple users in the tool at the same time working on different pages or different parts of it. And so it's really a really great tool. Prior to that, I was using a lot of Sketch to do a lot of this. And then Adobe Creative Suite has always been, your go-to, but that is primarily for like super high fidelity. And it's not that great of a collaborative tool, but it's really awesome still to this day. And then for prototyping, there's Framer and Principle, which do similar things. They're slightly different, although I think Figma is kind of going to, at some point, start to adopt some of these paradigms that you might see in both Framer and Principle. And then there's also Envision, which is more of a point-click to next screen type of prototyping tool.
So do you take those prototypes and you demonstrate those and have people use those prototypes so they're kind of live and working?
That's exactly right. We'll have people come in. We will test within our own. We have a local lab in our headquarters. We'll bring people in and we'll test using either the Framer prototype or the Figma prototype to kind of prove out some of these hypotheses that we have. And it's a science in terms of we create a hypothesis. If we do this, we'll see more click through, or if we do this, we'll see better usage. People will get better usage out of this thing. And so part of that prototyping and that testing is really either trying to prove out the hypothesis, and then if so, how.
Very cool.
Cool.
Interesting bunch of questions coming in. Some of them include, are the UX team hiring UXers? And the answer is yes. We've been encouraged to make sure that everyone's well aware that Epic is hiring UXers, UIers.
And developers.
And developers.
And UI developers.
Yes, absolutely. There were some good questions that came in here as well. So one of the questions, there was someone was saying that they believe that the launcher was made in Unreal Engine, but I don't believe that's correct. Can you say what launcher's developed in, or?
Yeah, it's developed in. We're actually in the process of changing that. So some of it's developed in Slate, which is I think it's a programming language, and some of it is developed in it's web tech right now. So it's a little bit. It's React as well as HTML, CSS, and so it's a little bit of both right now, but it's slowly going to be evolving to more web tech.
Wow, that's fantastic. That was, I think a lot of people really enjoyed seeing it, and beautiful, beautiful screen. So do you spend a lot of time, your primary tool set, you spend a lot of time clearly in Photoshop and things like that, aside from
Not so much Photoshop anymore. Used to be more so when I was more on the visual design side of things. I'm more so, I spend a lot of my time in Figma every day in Figma. Figma is like my go-to tool just because it has so much flexibility in what it's capable of doing. And I can also see across team, which is the primary benefit for me. A lot of the folks on this call and I can collaborate and have collaborated using Figma, using the same libraries, the same typefaces, things of that nature. So it's really been a real beneficial tool for us.
Sounds like an amazing tool. Everyone's been chatting about it quite actively. There seems to be some good Figma developers on the chat. That was great. Thank you, Phil. I think people really enjoyed that. Shall we?
My pleasure.
Continue the flow. who would like to go next?
I think I can follow up with, because what I do is so similar to what Phil does. In fact, you could use those same slides, and since I didn't prepare many visual slides, let's just pretend that I collaborated with Phil on all of those.
Fabulous.
Yeah. But like, like Phil started with, you have to kind of understand your players. You have to understand their motivations, and when there's millions and millions of them, that's a big variety of players, and so you have to kind of get a sense of different types of players that you might be appealing to, as you even before you even begin the process. There are with any sort of feature, whether big or small, we generally start out with a period of research and discovery. We kind of, and that includes a lot of things. So research can be into like, what do we think players might want from this feature? And we might, get some anecdotal data or some survey data from something like that. We might, if it's something that players have asked for, we might scour Reddit and see, what have people that have been vocal about a desire for something in the game talking about. We also have to understand like the higher goals, like where does this fit into the vision of where we're moving Fortnite forward? Where does this fit into where a game designer that's working on the feature might want? So, they might have a vision for something that creates this experience, and we try to take that and just we're still at the we haven't put pencil to paper yet. We haven't made any wireframes. We're just still like understanding the space that we need to work in. We talk with so different stakeholders on different ways and get that information, and we start creating a list of user stories, like as a casual player, I blah 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 blah, maybe related to the feature, or as someone that is a competitive player, I don't want to something, and sometimes those conflict, and you just have to kind of be aware of that. But you craft these sense of user stories, and getting back to like one of those user stories might be, I don't like change, like I don't like to see something different. But another user story might be, I'm excited by new things. So it's sometimes tricky to balance that, but once you've kind of got that understanding of the problem space and those stories of what you want players to experience, then you kind of start putting pencil to paper or blocking things out with just gray blocks and start thinking like, okay, how can we create those experiences for the player, and kind of to show just a little bit here. This is something that was made a while back for the Save the World, but it really kind of exemplifies the level of fidelity that we might put together, to just start blocking things out. We've got a 3D model on the right-hand side, and we've got some tiles that the player will interact with, and then some points of navigation and a primary interaction point. And we might play with these kind of ideas and do a lot of iteration. We could spend a couple of days just really going wild on what we think we might be able to do or what would be cool to do. Um, Sometimes you want to be very consistent, but sometimes a screen sort of kind of necessitates something different. Um, Back when we were working on uh, chapter 2, season 2, we introduced like a customizable character feature in the battle pass, and with that we didn't want to use some of the similar UI patterns because this feature was different, and we wanted players to immediately recognize that this is not the same as like customizing your styles in the locker. This character is different. And so with that, you can try a bunch of different grayscale layouts and move things around. And at that time, you're talking back and forth with your artists, your engineers, your other stakeholders to try to get a sense of like, oh, what's working, what's not working. That's a time period of a lot of like, fast failing, to use that term, of like you're trying things out, like what's working, what's not, what sticks, what doesn't, what um, what they somebody might think they can do on the screen versus what you're trying to get them to understand about the screen, and so you make quite a number of iterations on that front. Um, um, One of the here. Um, so once you've kind of worked through and you're starting to put together those wireframes, and you've kind of blocked out the flow, you can then put it all together. Once you're at a certain level of confidence, you put it together in a prototype, and we do that design work and that prototyping work in Figma as well. Figma has built-in support for controllers. So I will, build a prototype that can be worked, with a mouse, but also can use a controller to navigate through. And we can really start putting it in our hands and getting a feel for it. And you discover a lot in that process. Assumptions that you make about the flow, or you discover, oh, here's that little nuance that I really wasn't taking into account. But when I'm forced to kind of build it in a way that is tangible, you discover little things that you start having to make tweaks on. I think we have a video that can show like what that kind of prototype can look at. It's not too long, but it shows like an example of a quest and map screen that we worked on in fairly recently. I think we released it in season 5 of this season. That was put together in Figma, and it allowed the player to kind of navigate through a menu. Louis, should I bring that up?
I've got it here. If you tell me the
Okay,
name of
yeah.
it.
Let's take a look at that.
Which
real
one is
quick.
it? Give me a name. Do you recall?
It's I'm sorry.
Tanny 120.
NPC Quest Proto.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
There it is. It's playing on my screen.
Okay, great. So it's not a long clip, but it sort of illustrates like something that we can build using Figma that is tremendously cheaper than if we went ahead and tried to build this in the engine with all the data hooked up and the controls hooked up and everything piping through. And this is like a real quick way for us to test things out and get a feel for it. We can then also put it in front of users to do UX testing as well. So we'll reach out to our UX research team, ask them to bring in, not bring in these days, but contact and virtually bring in some of our players that we find that can interact with these screens and start giving us feedback. We'll also vet these things within the team as well, to start with other stakeholders to get their sense on what's working and what's not. And often this is the point where things feel real, so that people can make some interesting reactions or commentary about things. So at that point, we kind of, even before we get to this point, we've started to collaborate with our visual designers. I don't think we need to, I think we can stop with the
Sure.
video. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for finding that. The collaboration part with the visual designers, and at some point here, I'll hand it off to Marcel to kind of take over with that. But we take some of that grayscale, but then we like they've got such creative talent, and they will play with the layout and see how colors work in different ways to bring focus and attention to things, and really kind of add that layer of polish that they do so well, and we work with the engineers and other developers to get that into the game, and we can start testing it, because even testing at a prototype stage can sometimes, at least in the game space, not still feel real, because it's not actual gameplay. I'm not trying to look at a quest while somebody is shooting me, and that's a different experience that you can have. And so getting it into the game and doing play tests, and getting a sense of that, you get feedback from the team at large, you iterate, and you get to a point where you're ready to release it, and you put it out there, you feel successful until you go to Reddit.
I tried that once, and then I was jumping out of a bus again.
Never go to Reddit. Don't read the comments. Don't go to Reddit. You know you're good.
I think one of the most successful times, like I have felt the most successful, when we have made a significant change to some UI aspect of the game, and there's not a Reddit thread about it. At that point, it's like major win.
Yeah. Someone said in the chat earlier, when we were talking about successful design, it being invisible, and that I think that very much is, it's the double-edged sword of good UI. You want everyone to notice, but you also don't want your phone to ring or to get an email or a Reddit thread.
That's exactly it. It's like everyone will notice it if it's bad.
Yeah. It's very rare that I'm like, wow, the UI in that was so amazing. But I think I can think of some really bad UIs, but then there's probably just hundreds of UIs that are excellent, and I only just don't notice them because they're so excellent.
Right. Often our goal is not, we're not trying to be the superstars here. We're trying to have the players experience game content, or experience, the wonderful 3D cosmetics that are in the game, and appreciate that, and have fun with your friends, like to dance and emote and prank each other and win games and things like that. That's the experience that ultimately that we want people to have with Fortnite. And so our process is just to facilitate that often.
Unless you're making Tony Stark's HUD, then you kind of want them to go, "Ooh, look at that."
Yeah.
Marcel, you ready to go?
Yeah, sure, I am.
All right.
So so just picking up from where Matt left off. I mean, there's a few vids in this as well, so it'd be kind of helpful if you can pop them on
ready.
when they awesome. So basically, from a visual perspective, I think we've been quite quiet so far in the chat, just because it's nicer to have some eye candy to kind of show off like really what we kind of work on and all those things. First off, just thanks to Derek, he kind of helped me quickly put this presentation together. Like we decided to get just pull out some of the old Save the World features, or like a screen we did for Save the World, just because we knew that wouldn't be like anything contentious of that's currently Save the World is out there at the moment, or was out there, is out there. So this we can share. That's it, laughing there. But so this we know we can share this, and this is why we're kind of using that. But also this shows a nice breadth of what we as visual designers at Epic do. So so let me just jump into that then. So like Matt was saying, obviously we work with visual design, or with UX, getting a wireframe and getting it prototyped and getting the entire feature passed through stakeholders and everybody's happy, and then at that point we start working on visual design. So highlighted, there we go. So visual design, we'll do a few kind of mock-ups in usually either Photoshop or Illustrator. We are now moving towards Figma as well, because I hear Figma's got a very strong visual design presence as well. So we'll be starting to work in Figma as well, to do visual design. But at at the current point, we primarily work in Photoshop and Illustrator. Either of those two are fine. But yeah, so what we'll
Is Figma, sorry to interrupt you, is
no
that
worries.
is that their own company, or are they owned by Adobe, or like how does that work?
Anybody know?
They're not part of Adobe.
Yeah.
They're not a part of Adobe. They're a standalone startup. I think they've been around for a couple of years now, but
They're kind of crushing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're the most amazing thing since Unreal Engine.
They're doing a good
on
job.
now.
Yeah, they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of work to do to catch up with some of the prototyping tools, and they're gonna still have a pretty hard time competing with Illustrator and Photoshop. Those tools are so mature.
Yeah. I feel as well like Photoshop and Illustrator both. They target a very different audience as well. Photoshop will mostly pixel, and Illustrator for vectors. So, which at the end of the day, all kind of in the game engine boil down to the same output. But yeah, so at the moment we're still using primarily Photoshop and Illustrator, and it's in the future we will be moving over to Figma as well and seeing how we sit with that for visual design. So with this particular markup of this shows a nice kind of full range of things that we did. For us in this one, visual design actually, in 3D space, we put a few meshes together and just concepted out the background, got a few characters, some lighting, and so forth in. Now, obviously, this isn't 3D art that we created. This is just 3D art that we're just pulling out from the environment, putting it together, and that just kind of helps us sell the background that we want to put our UI on top of. So the idea of that would have been, or is, that environment art and animation would be able to come in afterwards and do a really decent pass of what we essentially would be doing a very quick pass on. So in this space, so basically we just start exploring a few things. If we look back over here, in this instance, you can see we kind of swapped, the screens on the left-hand side on this one, and the actual the list views in the center. So just exploring those placements and layouts and going off script a little bit with that. But for the next view, obviously we took it, dialing it up to about 11, seeing that obviously this isn't exactly where we want to be because there's too much happening on screen. Essentially exploring different ways of finding how to put content in the 3D space. So there would be like the UMG 2D layer on top of everything, but also finding a way to actually project some of the content that you want to be toggling through in the actual 3D space with the character in the back there. In this instance, each of the blocks you'd be hovering over would play a little video of like what the gadget would be able to do and what they would bring for you, what they would do for you in game. So it was just trying to push that back into the environment and make it all feel like a nice cohesive experience. So this is also just one of the concepts. We ended up landing for this one, which is a lot more similar to the initial kind of concept where you've got your interaction on the left-hand side, your information and your data is basically central, and then the character, like a third of the screen for the character on the right-hand side. I just felt like proportionally correct to this. In this instance as well, we also, to get the little videos that we wanted, we actually just went for full-on analog of like, this is a screen and the character's kind of around that screen and the little video starts playing on the screen. So doing the material work for that's something that we did on a visual in the visual design space as well. So once we got to that point, we sent it through user UX testing, research, put a few candidates in, and see how if people understood the feature questions. I think Matt would probably be able to speak a little bit more to this side of things.
Yeah, this is always a fun process to be a part of. So if you have never had your stuff tested, shame on you. But if you get the opportunity to watch a test, it's fascinating what users or players will think of when they're actually like interacting or playing with it. Like so many times, there's been a questionnaire like this after players have used something, or even just looking at a mock-up, and they feel totally confident that they understand. I get it. It does this, and you do that, and you work that, and you push that. It's easy. It makes sense. And then another question might be, well, what is this? And they're like, I have no idea. Like it just like they, our perception when we interact with software is often unique. We look at something, we think we understand it. Maybe we're just kind of have a blind eye to some element or some interaction or some functionality. We might be building on past patterns that we know, and we're kind of applying it to what we're seeing. So when we do tests like this, it's eye-opening, because you really sense, wow, people just don't get it, or man, that word choice is throwing off everything. It's one of the easiest things to change, but it can be one of the most impactful. It's just like your choice of copy on things. So this is an excellent time to get that user testing. Sometimes when people see the grayscale stuff, they might not feel, well, it's not real. They're probably going to make that better, so I don't even want to talk about it. But the closer you get to a final version, people seem to be a bit more honest about it. So it's great to always have this kind of testing.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, just like Matt was saying, prototyping with Figma as well. One of the things that we're looking to do with visual design, getting into Figma earlier on, is because we'll be able to do a visual pass on some of the initial UX prototypes and UX prototypes and the click-throughs. So we can get a prototype to a much higher visual quality and have people give that input that Matt was now saying, that essentially some people might not have opinions on gray box things because they can't project what the eventual visual design for a screen might look like. So that's part of our process that we at Figma. So over here I'm actually playing an animation. So if you could, it's 3 Danny 1 kV.
3 Danny 1 MKV. All right, here it comes on the screen. It's playing.
Awesome. So with this one, this is just a nice opportunity to take like an isolated widget from the screen and just show, this is what we're doing animation wise. So we've got the widget, we've got the widget set up, and just using UMG's sequencer, use a keyframe animator, and just showing off nicely how semi-complex we can get with the keyframe animation. This widget in itself is nice and small and contained, so there's not too much going on. But if you look at some of the more recent screens and so on in VR, like the cruise screen animation on that is fantastic. You break up on that animation timeline. It's just like so many widgets and everything animating at once. But yeah, this is just a nice opportunity to kind of show, like, in a little isolated widget, that small attention to detail in terms of like how things are animating across the screen. Maybe there's like a little slide, a flash that's going across the screen, but it's changing size as it goes across. It really just all adds to the experience. And it's like it's like you guys were saying earlier. It's like if people don't necessarily notice that, but it just adds so much to that little moment. The next screen, also another animation, which is 2 Danny 2. You can play that one, that'd be great. This is just an instance. It's just pulling out a material that we would also do as visual design. This is just this is a material instance. So, like I said earlier, in UMG, we really lean on material, UI space materials, and with that, we really kind of lean into UV space or UV math to derive shapes and to minimize the texture overhead that you normally would see in classic kind of UI texture heavy pipelines. So yeah, this is just a nice instance of what an instance material would be. Whereas we would have like a background gradient, but we'd add a nice strip of color across it. Whereas if you had to do that potentially in After Effects or so forth, you might have various layers stacked on top of each other. Now doing it this way for us, obviously we remove like a whole bunch of draw calls, because it's all just it's one single brush. It's a material and everything's happening inside the material. But with materials, obviously, you want the rest of the team to be able to use it. You can't just be the isolated holding this crazy material, and the rest of the team getting to it and not being able to understand it. So there's a little bit of UXing in this as well, like just proper naming of params and all those kind of things. But yeah, that's just a nice little shot into how we build these little widgets. Next screen is an animation again. That's the just 3 Danny. Strangest names to these animals. I'm sorry.
3 Danny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
There it is.
That's just a nice little final kind of shot of what basically where we left it before 3D came along and said, wow, what animation did you guys plug in there? Because that was just one of the random animations we popped in there just to kind of show, hey, this character can come to life. But animation team came past and they did like a proper like animation for that for this particular menu, so the character felt like he was in that space looking at the screen, just bringing the whole thing to life and just breathing that last bit of life into it that really just was the icing on top of this. And then yeah, this is a shot of the last screen of basically the final place where we took this. And yeah, you can see the character's got his little hands up and he's feeling a lot more. Yeah, it was a very cool screen. I think it was very interesting, nice little 3D space, a lot of interaction between UI, UMG, and the actual environment, and it just felt like actions you were taking on the UI layer were really affecting the 3D space behind it. So,
as a tech artist, I really enjoy that little peek into the layers and what's in UMG and what's in the material. And UI is one of the things that no one ever expects is going to kill your performance.
Absolutely.
Until they realize the UI is taking up all of the memory because we're loading all the images of all the weapons all the time. Oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Oh, yeah. It's amazing. And we've got to make this go to mobile. It's going to run on a phone and a Switch, and then your big old massive, RTX 3080 rig. So that's really cool to see, and also just to see that we're using UMG and we're using the animation timelines, and that is something that's a real thing. And I think for people who are looking to get into this field, kind of understanding that this is very much very much like other creative fields in the game industry. You really have to know kind of a pretty big technology stack as well as your art, and where it comes together like that is really where the magic happens, and making it look and be attractive to look at and move in these ways and be usable. It's amazing how many kind of layers have to be stacked on there to get to this AAA look, and this is very much kind of, I guess, where I'm going is that this is kind of a AAA way of approaching a user interface, and to get to that level of what we're used to seeing in games like Fortnite is an enormous amount of effort, even on the most simple of buttons like this, and the most simple of menus is really takes so much effort to get to that point, and even to the point where now I've got to make some keyframes on a timeline to really get this thing out the door.
Yeah,
really remarkable that you guys kind of own that whole process. It's really cool to see.
we do go quite broad, yeah, and I must say, like doing the each aspect of what we do, there's a lot of joy in it as well. Once you're setting up obviously there's a lot of joy in this art, but when you're setting up like a nice little animation and you get your keyframe just right and it just feels good, there's a lot of satisfaction that you're like, yeah, that feels good. But yeah, also just to go back to the material part, like what you were saying about, obviously Fortnite and games as they are, there's lots of full screen spaces where, classically if you didn't use materials, you might need to use a texture that facilitates like a gradient or a vignette or something across the screen, or just a radial gradient or so forth. But being able to use UMG's materials or UI space materials in UMG just allows us to do that with purely math, like UV math, as opposed to bringing in this massive texture that essentially that doesn't get pixelated, which will probably be about like 1024 by 1024, and you are then guaranteed to have somebody ask you, like, what's the performance hit here? So all those kind of things are just massively important.
Well, I don't think it can be that great of a job because look, I mean, Marcel, they've sent you to your room. Louise, they sent you to your room. I mean, Epic is not very good at it's. Look, they sent you to your rooms it's terrible.
We're waiting for the mall.
Oh, so we can go out and play at the mall again.
Yeah, I've got my walking shoes ordered. I'm ready. I'm gonna get there early and make a couple circuits.
That was fantastic, and yes, absolutely. We want to, I think, all thank Derek Diaz, who really did a tremendous amount of, big shout out to Derek, who really was the ringleader and helped put a lot of this material together, and was very instrumental in helping us all to gather this stream. I think everyone's really enjoying all of this material. And that's it. So thank you, everyone. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. We've got one more presentation, Louise. We're not going to forget you.
That would have been okay. It's hard to follow Marcel. I mean, I don't know that I want to go. Mine's not nearly so pretty.
You had me, Lewis. I was like, what is the co-host supposed to do when the host totally forgets somebody? I'm like, don't do that to me, man. I was going to have to call you out on the stream.
No, absolutely not. So, Louise, you've got some really cool stuff to show us. You work on some amazing engine content. So I think and there's one thing before we jump into what Louise wants to share with us, I think the one thing I wanted to point out or discuss or just sort of, you guys, both Phil's team and Matt and Marcel's team, you showed us a kind of potentially a tiny slice of what you guys do a lot of, right? Like that's a small amount, and the flows that you showed add up to a tremendous amount of flows for multiple screens over months and years, right? So this is a process which you all embrace and love, and this is the work, right? So this is where what is the term? The blade meets the grindstone. What is this is the
rubber
stuff.
Meets the road.
The rubber meets the road, right? And so there's no real shortcuts, because if you take them, then you end up with not usable or user experience, ugly UI. What happens when you take shortcuts in this work?
Well, so I look at things as Lego pieces, or building a house. I think is probably a better analogy, right? There's a foundation. That foundation creates basically a solid structure for you to build upon. So when you take shortcuts, you're actually chipping away at that foundation for your overall product, right?
Yeah.
So you think things get misaligned when you take those shortcuts.
That sounds right.
Well stated.
That's a good segue to you, Louise.
Okay, so I'll actually be pretty quick. Phil really outlined a full process from beginning to end, and on the engine team, we emphasize slightly different parts of that process more than others, and we're constrained in different ways than maybe when you're making a web page or you're doing the game design. So we have quite different constraints. And we're also doing this thing now just like Matt was saying earlier, where we're trying to get ahead of things, but for a long time we were playing catch up. And so we were taking what was there and trying to shape it and sort of recreate that foundation that Philip was talking about from underneath, at least from the UI perspective. So what I'm going to show is I'll talk about the process, but I'm really just going to show a couple quick examples that also are quite dated at this point. Don't focus as much on the visuals, but focus more on our UX process and sort of how we're playing that catch up, and what it looks like on our team. So let's get this screen shared. Is that up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So a while ago, some of you may remember that the Chaos team was coming online. And early when they started, there's just a brilliant group of engineers who came on and were like, okay, we want to, bring this destruction system into Unreal. And early on, they're sort of just figuring out how it can even fit, and they're making these prototypes. And so they're so focused on their tech and implementing it and how it fits within Unreal Engine. They just get it in however they can, and often, hopefully, from now and into the future, we're now starting to see things before people really start developing. But this is an example of something pretty typical that we saw where they're prototyping something, they're getting it in however they can. And in this example, they sort of had put Fracture inside of another mode inside of Unreal, and they got this flat list of buttons because the engineer who was doing the cool destruction work wasn't focused on the buttons. They were focused on making the destruction work, and so they just got the buttons in however they could. And these, the astute may notice that they're mostly alphabetical buttons. Which I really loved when I came in. They're mostly alphabetical because I think they were alphabetical by the name of the command that was being executed. And as we all know, alphabetical is not frequently how users tend to go through their workflows. So one of the first things that we did was we chatted, we identified a core group of users, and we're lucky enough to have access directly to our artists in-house. And there were some artists working directly on that project that we could work really closely and iterate with. And so this is just, an example of going through and identifying what their process is and where their pain points are, and which buttons are they hitting first, and how are they getting from, hey, I opened the editor, to I want to destroy this column. And what does that look like? So we're mapping out that process right here, and there are loops in that process, and there are things that they have to do 10 steps for that really, hopefully, we can consolidate down to one. So this is an example of what that looked like really early on. And then just like the other teams, we identified within that process, there were certain steps that had to be taken, and we broke that up into a wireframe with just these really blocky, not fine art, just blocky process. And we vetted that with the artists, and in conjunction with the engineers about, what is possible, what can we achieve. And so we ended up with something like this. And after some fine tuning at the end, we came up with something like this. We broke Fracture up into its very own special tab. And now when you come into this, you actually start at the top left, and you're like, okay, so I need to select something and do something here. Oh, look, here are my view tools. And a user can go through this in a top to bottom way, and at the end, hit a button and actually get a Fracture out of it. So this is one of my favorite slides. So Fracture ultimately was what we call in Unreal Engine a mode. And in early Unreal Engine 4, now there are a growing number of modes as all these cool texts come in. People often tend to make new asset editors, or they tend to make modes so that you're working within the level editor itself. And when I started, this is what each of the different modes look like. This little thing on the top was a mode switcher, and every single mode had a completely different UI to it. This one on the left has, like the tabs are sort of on the left and you pick something here. And then this one, there's like another set of tabs, and then there's like tools within it, and each tab had different tools. This one, again, it's sort of like on the side, there are tabs. This one has like a radio button style. This one has a button style. They're all totally different. And we very carefully culled through each one of these modes, looked at them, and they were actually doing nearly identical things in many cases. You're selecting, your actor in the scene, you're performing some sort of action on them, you're using a tool, and maybe you're tweaking settings within that tool. And so something that our team looked at is, okay, what if we just like make a different space for the tools themselves, and would that work? And so we identified, the different groups of tool. Now, we didn't end up using these groupings and some of this, but we just sort of roughly threw it up there and, threw it in front of both the developers and the set of artists that we're working with to say, hey, what about this? And this is a case where, each one of these different modes, the expert artists on these modes, they had to make a radical shift. This was not necessarily welcome for everybody. But in the long run, what happens is now, as we cycle through these different modes, each of the modes, okay, now I know as I'm going through different modes, this is where all of my tools are. And here's where I use those settings. And, my main focus is in the viewport itself. And so we've brought consistency, not just to the users, but to the developers too, so that when they're coming on and they're making these new amazing tools, that there really are such cool engineers that we have here, they can actually have a place and easily and quickly put their tools into this infrastructure. And, this is still evolving quite a bit. We've, had lots of discussions about, how to continue tweaking these tool palettes, as we're calling them, for an ever-growing group of tools and modes. So it's evolving. So that's just like one little slice of
consistency.
Piece of the puzzle.
Consistency 2.0.
Say that again.
Consistency 2.0.
Consistency 2.0. Yeah, that's just it. And it's not as, we're not at this point, we weren't quite as focused on the visuals as we were on just bringing some consistency to the experience for people, so that when you jumped into that new tool, you weren't searching for how to use it.
The modes panel in general, as someone who's taught Unreal a lot, was just really hard to explain to people, because it didn't fit any other kind of, to tell someone, when you click here, it changes the editor mode.
Yeah.
But it looked like a tabbed menu that was very much in its own thing, and it didn't sell itself that it was changing the mode of the editor, and so people would be like stuck in foliage mode trying to edit, and I'm one of those old guys who's been using Unreal since Rocket in UE3 before that, and so I was like, who's changed my modes panel? And then, I went up there and I started to break my muscle memory. And now I'm like, oh, this is so much better. It's all right here. And I don't have to, my brush size is always right here, not hiding under this menu, and all these like little things that once I get past my initial, reaction of like, oh, it's different. It's so much better.
I can hear Tom saying that. Who changed my modes panel?
That's exactly what I said.
Curmudgeon.
You weren't the only one.
I'm sure. But, in the last couple of years, too, I feel like like until Unreal 422, like there were no new modes. And now
Now
suddenly there's all these new
exploding.
modes that we need to
Yeah.
deal with. And not only that, it's kind of feels like a two-way street, where now that the modes actually feel like changing editor modes, people creating these systems are like, oh, maybe this should be a mode, rather than this should be, a tool or a right-click menu or something else. It's made the mode system into something that's consistent.
A little
2.0.
more formal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also, part of the process that I think we haven't talked about today is we talk about user experience research, but also at the beginning of our process, we talk about research, which is just us looking at what exists out there already in the world and those paradigms that people are familiar with. And Unreal now is being used in all sorts of different industries, not just games. It came from games, but we have so many people coming to Unreal from architecture, from different manufacturing, because they want to look in VR, or people coming from film and using DCC tools. And so part of our process also is to evaluate and really look deeply in all those other tools and understand the paradigms that those people are, the mental models that those people have from using other tools. And does that map to our tool? It doesn't always map to our tool, but making that transition to our tool easier, we do the best we can.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is that when Tom and I would spend so much time teaching people, we would tell them, if you are using Maya Max or even Photoshop, you probably already, or even other engines, you probably already know 60, 70, 80% of Unreal. But I think that the way that these modes are evolving, we can actually increase that recommendation, because it's becoming more familiar in some ways by nature of consistency 2.0. This idea that when you jump into a mode, there's more consistent user interface, user experience there that you can offer that might align more with something you would find in an architecture set of software or in a design set of software, or
and we're trying to bring that also, earlier you were talking about Niagara and blueprints graphs, and we're trying to bring that for all of the different aspects, so that when you jump into Unreal, these are paradigms that you can easily pick up on, and from whatever past experience you have, combined with, the new awesomeness that Unreal has to offer.
Certainly. Well, we, and let us, of course, apologize to everyone in the stream. We just can't really talk about Unreal Engine 5. Sorry. There's plenty of people working on that stuff. It's going to be an exciting year. We can certainly say that it's going to be an exciting year.
Maybe we can have this talk after.
Yes. Yeah,
absolutely.
But, we can guarantee you that we've learned a lot. Yeah, we've all learned a lot. And there's, I think, some really exciting things that will be, evolutions of all the things that Epic has learned and the engine teams have learned. So, hang tight. It's going to be good. It's going to be a good time. And let me apologize because both Matt and Phil had meetings, and they apologized in a chat that we had because they didn't want to get in trouble for having to go to work.
Pumpkins again,
because you already see that, as I mentioned, Louise and Marcel got sent to their rooms because they didn't go to the meetings last week, and so that's why they're in their rooms. And so Bill and Matt did not want to get sent to their rooms, and it happens at Epic when you don't go to your meetings.
And soon you'll have to go to Bed Bath and Beyond when you don't.
I want to absolutely thank once again Matt and Phil, and of course Louise and Marcel and Tom and Mark, who are in the chat, and of course Derek, who helped so much and
Thanks, Derek.
everyone at Epic who's been helping put these streams together, our community team and marketing team. And yeah, this was a really fabulous stream. If there's any last questions for Marcel and Louise, and of course, anyone who's participated, this has been a really active and lively stream, and we really hope that you've enjoyed this series. I think it's been very informative. Any last words, Louise or Marcel, that you'd like to share with the folks? We've had a really active community group here that's been engaged, and there have been quite a few questions, and I apologize for not getting to all of them. I think that we've talked about a lot of them in general.
So I think we tried to get a lot of them. There were a lot of questions about specific software, and quite a few questions, of course, about Unreal Engine 5. And I think we covered a lot of questions, but a lot of questions, I think, from people who are looking to, as we often get, people who are looking to enter into this industry.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking, and a lot of them are looking to pivot. They're already doing UI UX or data science and something else, and they're looking over to the games industry, and they're like, that looks fun. Do you guys have any parting advice for the audience who's looking to get into this field, where they should start, what they should do? Anything? No?
Do you want to go, Marcel?
No,
you
you
look
can-
like you want to say something.
I've got something to say, but you go first.
There are a lot of really cool like master's programs at this point. That's one way to go about it. Another is just your experience in your work. And so if you can, put your work together, read as much as you can. There's a ton of read both the classics, UX texts. There's a lot of books from, you can look up, there's a million, lists of the classic UX books and research. There's a little psychology. If you can take a psych class or two, that helps. If you can take a design class or two, it's sort of where you want to fall on that spectrum of UX design. But really, just at the end of the day, I think all of us are really passionate about it, and we care about it. And, we're sort of driven to make good UIs, UX. And so just however you can do that wherever you are now, keep doing that, and bring that with you.
Good advice. Good advice. Passion is huge in the games field.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fix that whole.
There are a lot of passionate people at Epic. It's
I would
true.
fix that whole toothpaste on the toothbrush thing, because I think that's really busted.
We'll get on that next.
Okay. I'm looking for a toothbrush mode. Marcel, do you have any advice?
Any advice from me? So I kind of, from my side and just from my personal experience, like how I got into the UI and UX, like obviously I did study graphic design, but then I was doing environment art, and that's my time going a little bit back now. I kind of came from a time where like the environment artists would be like, oh, we need to do the UI and then get it in. But the field has grown so much, and I feel like I still kind of meet people who are doing graphic design or UX and doing it for sectors that aren't necessarily in the games industry. And then they seem quite surprised that there's such a growing community of UX and UI folks in the actual games industry. And you kind of hear people like, oh wow, I would really like to do that. How do I get into it? But I guess it's just just to put it out there that some people shouldn't just feel like they have to go and work for software or front ends and all that. There's definitely so much going on in the games industry in terms of UI and UX, and it's such a rewarding career that you guys should definitely jump at it.
The demand is there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely there. So
I think it's more about your process than anything. It's, you can apply design thinking, whether you're building toys. In fact, one of the engineers who just joined us, her previous job was building physical toys. Like, she was working with a manufacturing company. So you can apply design thinking to any field, really. And so just learn as much as you can about the design process itself, and apply it.
Fantastic advice.
Awesome.
Well, one of the last thing, if you guys don't
Please.
mind, like just
Please.
all the kind of stuff that I showed as well. Like I wanted to just kick that off by just speaking to the team, and what a fantastic team I'm fortunate to be part of. Like the UI UX team at Epic and on Fortnite are just top notch, all fantastic people, and yeah, just shout out to them all.
Absolutely.
Well, thank everyone again, and hopefully you all stay safe and come back and see us next week, Tom.
Next week.
All right. And thank you again. And thank you again, UX UIers from Epic Games. And take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.